Go to the hardwired headphones. All right. We are live. It is June 6th, 2025. This is the Prospect Weekly Roundup, our rapid fire look around the country at the important stories that both we reported on and what we think is coming next. I'm David Dayen, executive editor of the American Prospect. We do this every Friday at 12:30 Eastern. With me today is our intrepid founder and a co-editor of the Prospect, Robert Kuttner. Bob, how you doing?
Doing okay. There sure is a lot to talk about.
There is, and I know you're dealing with some home issues, so we'll get this going as fast as we can. Yeah, I mean, I think 24 hours ago, our focus might have been elsewhere, but there was this big slap fight that happened yesterday between the richest man in the world and the leader of the free world, or at least as the saying goes. And now there's some, a little more attempts at détente that we're starting to hear about. There's apparently calls being set up between Elon Musk's camp and Donald Trump's camp. But it certainly went out with a blaze yesterday. I mean, when people are accusing each other of being on the Epstein list, it's usually not a great sign for future comedy and friendship. So, what are your thoughts on the Trump Musk dust up?
You know, my thought is that both of them are so narcissistic and so impulsive that I would be quite amazed if a truce held, because these are deep narcissistic wounds, and they have this deep need to get even with each other. So even if their handlers are trying to negotiate some kind of a détente, I would be amazed if it stuck. And this is two scorpions in a bottle, both in a position to do very dire damage to each other. And we should really begin with the damage that Trump can do to Musk, because Musk has no business having a monopoly on things like uh, space launches for NASA
Right.
or battlefield communications. And it was my old friend Steve Bannon who said, nationalize it. And for once, Bannon is right. And Trump actually has the authority to do this
He
under.
made that statement yesterday on his radio show, Bannon did, and got a lot of attention. There was a quickie poll that came out this morning from YouGov that asked the public, do you support rolling back Elon Musk subsidies? And there were a lot of not sures, but among people who answered, it was 41% yes, 21% no. So not only would Trump have, some authorities to use the Defense Production Act and other matters to end this monopoly, but it would actually be pretty popular, it seems like. And Trump has to consider that. For Republicans, the silver lining, it's a good news, bad news scenario. Obviously, the bad news is you have the richest man in the world who spent $250 million on the last election, saying, basically breaking from the president, and puts them in a situation where that money, which they might have expected for the 2026 midterms, is probably not going to come. At the same time, uh, Musk spent a ton of money in the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race and lost badly and probably made things worse. So, in some sense, Republicans are getting to jettison one of the more unpopular figures in their orbit, in their coalition. And, that might be a good thing in
Yeah,
this.
except that if he still is in a spirit of retribution and vindictiveness, he could throw a lot of money at candidates who would be trying to primary Trump allies. So he'd flip that script on Trump. I mean, this is nothing but good. This is the kind of a catfight that ultimately has to be bad for Republicans and good for everybody else.
And ultimately, as Ryan Cooper wrote for us this morning in kind of a recap, this is a byproduct of oligarchy. So you have two people who have never heard the word no in their lives, and suddenly going up against each other, where each side has some leverage and each side has
Hey,
a big
David, I'm
phone.
hearing it. I'm hearing an echo. Is
But you
everything
are,
is everything okay technically on your end?
I think so. We'll get the producer to see if that's the case, and we'll try to fix that. But what I was saying was that oh, I guess I'm breaking up. Okay, well
Let's
Bre-
try. So how's
bre-
this? Is it better?
Breakup is the theme of the day.
Yeah, indeed. Is this better?
Much better.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, we'll go with that. So, all right. I'm not exactly sure where I was, but we were talking about Musk and Trump and the impact on Republicans, and obviously he's got a negative impact or a negative profile politically in the country at large, and his money has been counterproductive in some ways in races in 2025. But, oh, I know what I was saying. Yeah, I was mentioning Ryan Cooper's piece, who says that this is an inevitable kind of byproduct of oligarchy. When you have two people who have never heard the word no in many, many years, they tend to believe that they have the perfect solution to everything. And when these ideas come into conflict, both sides have no reason to back down, and they both have big media megaphones and things like that. So, the way to avoid situations like this is to not give such incredible wealth and power to individuals.
Well, also, they're in the habit of communicating by insult. That's Trump's favorite mode of
Right.
articulating anything, and ditto Musk. And so when that weapon is turned on each other, it's just the Donnybrook.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and then I mean, I think one of the near-term consequences of this is the impact on the Republican reconciliation bill, the one big beautiful bill, which passed the House, is now, under this interlocking set of kind of behind closed door negotiations in the Senate. And into that mix, which is not really assured of a solution, here comes Elon Musk barreling in with kind of a Tea Party kind of perspective on the bill, that it doesn't cut spending enough. It does, that it creates too many deficits, and this is kind of the perspective of the House Freedom Caucus hardliners who kind of swallowed their pride and voted for the bill, and also the perspective of several senators, people like Ron Johnson and Rand Paul and Mike Lee, who are trying to add spending cuts to the bill. And now you have Musk saying to his 200 million followers, yeah, we got to kill this bill because it adds mountains of debt. Now, there's some question as to whether Musk is being self-serving here, as what he's really after is restoring the clean energy tax credits for electric vehicles that help his company, or maybe other things. But the fact is that this Musk condemnation of the bill comes in at a pretty sensitive time when the Senate is trying to work with their own members who have a critical mass to block the bill and are asking for more spending cuts, set against a separate critical mass of senators who want fewer spending cuts, particularly to Medicaid and a longer phase out of the clean energy tax credit. So,
Yeah. It's
talk about that dynamic.
well, it's what they call a negative majority. I mean, there is not a positive majority in favor of any combination of these provisions. You've got 50 plus senators in favor of blocking the bill based on this objection or that objection. And interestingly, you've got more senators 5 or 6 probably who want to restore spending cuts, as you said, particularly in Medicare and in some of the other areas. And you've got maybe 2 or 3 who think it cuts too deeply. And, eventually there'll be some kind of a bill, but I think there'll be a lot of mayhem
Yeah.
getting there, and a lot of damage.
And you have to look at the impact of what the Senate does on the House. Like, it was clear to me, and this week, by the way, we started a new daily newsletter. I don't know if it'd be every single day, but it was every day this week, called Trump's Beautiful Disaster, which is about the big, beautiful bill. And all the various machinations thereof. So one of the big, I said this on Monday on the inaugural edition of our Beautiful Disaster coverage, is that in the House, the critical mass of people were these handful of House members in high tax states, New Jersey, California, and New York, who really wanted changes to the state and local tax deduction. Now, let's explain what that is. The state and local tax deduction is something that says, well, you can take, if you itemize, you can deduct a portion of the taxes that you pay at the state level off of your federal income tax. And this used to be uncapped. It was unlimited. All of the taxes you paid, state and local, excuse me, state and local, could be applied to this deduction. And it was a huge deduction, mostly for the rich. I mean, it was for people who itemize, that self-selects for wealthy people. And it's for people in high tax states who, if you add the property taxes, if you add state and local taxes, if you add sales taxes, you get a pretty high number that you can deduct off of your federal taxes. So in the 2017 Trump tax cuts, they capped this deduction at $10,000. And this, it was seen as targeting blue states in a way, but it really made angry the suburban districts of well-off people who often are represented by Republicans, places like Long Island, Orange County, bedroom communities in New Jersey, who were really angry about this because their constituents, their very well-off constituents, were losing a really big tax break. So there was this group that said, we're not voting for this bill, the continuation of the Trump tax cuts, unless you give us a bigger deduction in the state and local tax deduction. And so what they came up with in the House was they upped that cap from 10,000 to 40,000. And then they capped it at, you have to make less than $500,000 to take the deduction at all. So this is very expensive. Over a 10-year period, it costs $786 billion. That's the estimate from the Congressional Budget Office to do this. And the problem is you go from the House to the Senate. In the Senate, all the senators from California, New York, and New Jersey are Democrats. So there's nobody there that wants to preserve that deal for those House members.
On the Republican side.
On the Republican side. And this is a reconciliation bill where it's a party line vote and only Republicans really matter. So I knew that this was the first place they were going to look. If they need money for this bill, they would just recap the state and local tax deduction. And sure enough, that's what they're talking about. There was a big meeting this week between the Republicans on the Finance Committee, Senate Finance Committee, and Trump. And Trump expressed a willingness to change that deal. And this immediately set the SALT caucus, which is state and local tax SALT, set the SALT caucus apoplectic. They came out and said, look, we are going to take down this bill. You can't take away the one thing you gave us. We will take down this bill if we have problems with the deal that we made. So that's a huge, I mean, it's not just can you find 50 that agree to the bill on the Senate side. It's that can you find 50 to agree to a bill that you would also get 218 in the House for? And that's the real jigsaw puzzle here.
it rubbed salt in their wounds. Um,
Thank you
so,
for answering with a pun.
I guess the question is, will they just punt and do some kind of a continuing resolution? I mean, what if they just can't get to yes?
It seems impossible to me that that would be the case, right? I mean, ultimately, what are we talking about when we're talking about this bill? We're talking about cutting taxes and taking benefits from poor people. This is like core Republican stuff, going back to Ronald Reagan, Newt Gingrich, Paul Ryan. It seems impossible to me that you couldn't find a majority out of the Republican caucus for that.
You know, there was a story this morning that the Congressional Budget Office, of all people, who were pretty honest, came out with an estimate that if Trump's tariffs are actually implemented in their current form, that saves about $2.8 trillion over 10 years. So now they're not going to be implemented in their current form.
What do you mean by current form? Do you mean like the 140% tariff on China and things like that?
No, the 30%, the
I see.
40%, the stuff, the really crazy stuff is held in abeyance. But if you have tariffs, in the 30% range, that's a ton of money. Now, it does a lot of damage to GDP, but it also brings in a lot of revenue. And so the CBO has kind of pulled a rabbit out of a hat based on an improbable assumption, but they do that often. So you could almost imagine the deficit hawks. I mean, I'm making this up and it may not happen, but you could almost imagine the deficit hawks saying, hey, Trump's tariffs actually offset the tax cut. So the fiscal picture isn't as bad as we
Right.
thought. And so we have a deal. I mean,
Let's lay the numbers out more specifically and talk about sort of this magic math that they're going to try to use to justify what they're going to do. So the bill as it stands right now has about $3.8 trillion in tax cuts. And some of that is kind of an understatement because some of these tax cuts are time limited, like the no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime. Those are only for 4 years. And at the end of that 4 years, they're going to try to extend them. So if you would extend everything out, it's about 5 trillion in tax cuts. But let's keep to the number that's in the bill. The number in the bill is 3.7 trillion in tax cuts. It's offset by 1.3 trillion in spending cuts. And so if you look at CBO's numbers, they say the bill will cost 2.4 trillion. And then when you add interest costs, interest on the debt, this new debt that's created, it goes to 3 trillion. And
so
so if you look at the tariff thing, that fills most of that
yeah,
hole,
and
but
so
based on an imperfect assumption that every tariff will be collected, that
correct.
there won't be any exemptions, that countries won't make deals, and that countries won't work around the tariffs through transshipments and other things to avoid the duties.
That's all true, but for now, all that the Republicans need is a magic number. And
Right.
so if they accept the CBO's rather improbable assumptions, and CBO has a pretty good reputation as a neutral,
Well, they've
honest
been
broker.
trashing CBO,
Well,
the
that's what's so
Republicans,
funny. That's right. So
that because they didn't give them the number that they wanted as far as
right.
the overall bill.
But now with this rabbit that they just pulled out of a hat, you could imagine a deal, a grand bargain, where they give back some of the cuts, particularly the cuts like to Medicare that have inflamed several members of the Senate, and say, well, we have a solution to this. The deficit is not as big as we thought, and here's
Right.
CB confirming that. So that's the kind of end game
Yes,
deal
and
one could imagine.
there's a second end game possibility as well, and this involves something called the current policy baseline. So, as I just said, $3.8 trillion in tax cuts, $1.3 trillion in spending cuts, something like that. Uh, the the 2017 tax cuts are in place now. So there are a lot of senators and a lot of members of the House on the Republican side who have said, well, we're just extending current law, so that doesn't cost any money, really. And if you make that assumption, then you actually have a bill that cuts the deficit by 1.2 trillion, right? Because
Spending cuts, yeah.
yeah, because the Trump tax cut extension costs about 3.7 trillion. Then there are other tax changes that largely offset one another. So anyway, uh, so what the Senate said is, oh, actually, we're following the current policy baseline, which means this bill actually saves money. Now that's going to be challenged by Democrats to the Senate parliamentarian, which is like the arbiter of what goes and what stays and what goes in a bill, because we're doing it under this process called budget reconciliation. Everything has to be budgetary in nature. And so for that reason, the parliamentarian looks at a various provision and says, okay, well, that is not incidental to the budget. That has a primary purpose of budgetary use. And so that can stay in the bill. Or that actually is incidental to the budget. It's really a policy decision, and that gets out of the bill.
So,
And yeah,
David, for people who are not budget wonks, what's wrong with just extending the current policy baseline and saying that, okay, the tax cuts that were enacted in 2017, they're current law, and all we're doing is keeping current law? That sounds commonsensically
it
right.
sounds commonsensical, but when we're talking about budget scoring, in other words, we're trying to figure out what the budget is going to look like years and years from now. And the current law baseline says, oh, we're going to revert back at the end of this year to the Obama era tax cuts, tax levels. And those tax levels will bring in a lot more revenue, and we would not have as bad a budget situation over time. And so if you have this situation where you say, uh, and a lot of this has to do with the cockamamie way that we do bills to get around the Senate filibuster. The only reason we're doing the reconciliation process is because it only takes 50 votes, whereas just passing legislation, you have the filibuster, and it would probably take 60 votes. So uh, the Republicans have basically, with this current policy baseline idea, found out a way to make tax cuts permanent without having to abide by the budget reconciliation math. And
Yep.
here's how they do it. They say, okay, we're going to do this temporarily for X amount of years. And it won't cost anything, because one of the things about budget reconciliation is everything has to be budget neutral after the first 10 years. That's a rule. You can't get this special 50 vote, majority vote process unless everything evens out after the 10-year window. So they say, oh, we'll time limit these tax cuts so that it's neutral after the 10-year window. And then if they come back the next time and say, well, that's just extending current law, so that doesn't cost anything, that means you've gamed the reconciliation process, because you can now make any tax cut and then just make it permanent the next time. So that's, to the extent there's a problem there, that's the problem with it.
But I guess my takeaway from this conversation is that the only way they're going to finesse this and come to agreement is with some kind of gimmick, either the current policy baseline gimmick
Right.
or the CBO gimmick on all this
And to
money
be
that's going to
clear, these
fall out of
gimmicks
the
are
sky.
rhetorical. These are rhetorical
They're not
gimmicks.
real numbers.
These aren't gimmicks that allow them to do X, Y, or Z. These are rhetorical gimmicks where they can claim to have done this, and claim that they're actually being fiscally responsible
Right.
when it's dubious. And one of the entities that they really have to make this claim to is the bond market, right? Because what we're seeing is a lot of pressure on bond markets to take care of a debt situation that, because of higher interest rates, is kind of becoming a problem.
Right. And an intriguing question is whether the bond market is going to believe the CBO, because the CBO, although it's considered an honest broker, has a not very good record of basing forecasts on extrapolations of current trends
That's right.
that are not guaranteed to continue.
That's right. They
So
change every year.
if I were the bond market, knowing a little bit about politics and knowing that these tariffs are bargaining chips, if that, or expressions of impulsivity, the assumption that these tariffs are just going to continue indefinitely is a kind of preposterous assumption, and shame on the CBO. So I'd be surprised if the bond market didn't see through it.
I mean, the very funny thing is that when this Trump Musk dust up kind of initiated yesterday, Treasury bond prices absolutely crashed. They went in totally in the toilet on the expectation, or maybe the hope, that this would doom the bill, the reconciliation bill, and that that would be better for the long-term fiscal situation if that bill was doomed. So that what I thought was a very interesting
Yeah.
byproduct
Yep.
of the Real Housewives of
Mm.
DC, or whatever you want to call it. I think ultimately, is there going to be a deal? It's probably pretty likely, just because what they're trying to do is broadly acceptable to every faction of the Republican caucus, right? But the details are, it's really hard. It's not just Medicaid cuts. It's not just the clean energy tax credits. It's not just the SALT deduction. It's, all these Trump tax promises that the Senate seems to be not that into, like no tax on tips or overtime. They think it's too expensive. They really want to make permanent business tax cuts, like research and development and expensing, interest expensing, that are only temporary in this bill. So there are a lot of red lines. I said in my piece today that it's red line season in Washington. That a lot of senators are drawing a lot of red lines, and sometimes it can be hard to step over that line once you draw it.
Right.
Okay, so in the second half here, I want to get into something you wrote about today, Bob, which is really fascinating. Obviously, Democrats have been kind of in the wilderness over the last 6 months since the election, and wondering what the way forward is. And probably the biggest partisan election that is happening since that time is in New York City, and it's the mayor's race. Eric Adams obviously is a disgraced figure in New York City. He's not even contesting the Democratic primary. He's going to run as an independent. But we have this field that's shaped up, and there's been a real shift from the conventional wisdom, I don't know, even 2 months ago,
2 weeks
and
ago.
2 weeks ago, and what there is today. So you wrote about this, so tell us about it.
Well, so the conventional wisdom was personified by Andrew Cuomo, who spent about 6 months preparing for this race. He raised a ton of money. He did a lot of appearances in venues important to the Black community, like Black talk shows, Black churches. And he appeals to pretty much the same base that put Eric Adams in office before Adams flamed out,
Right.
namely African Americans, people worried about crime, especially in the so-called outer boroughs, conservative Jews, and the real estate lobby and Wall Street. So that looks like a pretty formidable coalition. And what Cuomo was selling was competence. I may be a bit of a jerk and I may be a little bit corrupt, but Adams was corrupt and incompetent. So if you don't mind a little bit of corruption, I'm competent, and you'll get a
So
competent.
like the old bumper sticker in the Louisiana race with Eddie Edwards, where he said, "Vote for the crook. It's important."
Right.
Right.
So anyway, and then on the progressive side, he had 7 or 8 candidates, including some very good ones, all crowding out each other. And
Right.
then out of nowhere, this 33-year-old assemblyman from Queens Zoran Mdani, who's a Muslim and a member of DSA, goes from 1% in the polls to running almost neck and neck with Cuomo. And he did it because he's incredibly charismatic and he's got an army of volunteers and he vaults to the head of the pack. And so even before AOC endorsed him day before yesterday, and the Working Families Party endorsed him, and he really shone in the debate. He was running a very close second to Cuomo. And the next poll, now the Democratic primary is on the 24th, so we've got less than 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But in the next poll, he could even be polling ahead of Cuomo, or the poll is going to tighten. I mean, New York has
Right.
this very complicated ranked choice system, and what the Emerson poll, which is the most sophisticated poll, showed was that after all of the reallocations in the final
Right.
round,
Well, let's explain that a little more. So ranked choice voting, the way it works in New York City is instead of you going to the polls and choosing one candidate
right,
and that's it, you actually rank your top five candidates. And a winner is not decided until they get 50%. So what happens is you have 10 candidates, let's say, and everybody's first choice is what's reflected in the first vote. And then they say, okay, the last person here we're going to throw out. And whoever that person ranked as their second choice will allocate those votes to that person, and so on and so on until someone gets over 50%. Now, in that poll you were talking about by Emerson, once you did this over and over and over again, and you got to the end, it was Cuomo 54, Mdani 46.
and
So that's the
close,
baseline right now. And that's,
right?
yeah, single digits.
And that's again, just to repeat,
And that was before all the things you talked
that's
about.
before AOC's endorsement, that's before the Working Families Party endorsement, that's before the debate.
Right.
So he could actually win the Democratic primary, Mdani. Now, let's game out what happens then.
Right.
That doesn't finish things because in November, in the general election, which does not have ranked choice voting, you're going to have four candidates. Cuomo has already gotten himself an independent line.
So you're
Mdani,
saying if Cuomo loses the Democratic primary, it is very likely that he will run anyway in the general election as an independent candidate.
just about certain, as will Eric Adams, as will a Republican. And then
Right.
Mdani will get the Working Families line. So you
Well, let's just be clear here. So there are two scenarios. There's a primary coming up in less than 3 weeks, and the two scenarios generally, unless something shocking happens, is that Cuomo wins or Mdani wins. So if Mdani wins, you're saying Cuomo is going to run in the general election, and Mdani will be the Democratic candidate.
right,
And so that's where you get to four. If Cuomo wins narrowly, you're saying that Cuomo will be the Democratic candidate. And then you have the Working Families Party, which, for people who aren't from New York, there's this thing called fusion voting where, there are different ballot lines that are available to people. And the Working Families Party can opt to join with the Democratic candidate, or they could run their own candidate.
right. And they and Cuomo hate each other. It's inconceivable that they would back Cuomo. The only slight complication is that there are some in the Working Families Party who believe that the Speaker of the New York City Council, Adrienne Adams, no relation to the current mayor, who's a much admired African American woman, might do better in the general than Mdani. But I think the general consensus, and I talked to several people in reporting this piece, is that if Mdani comes in a very strong second to Cuomo, it would almost be impossible to deny him the Working Families line.
Right.
So the cool thing about this is that the other two candidates all pull from Cuomo. Adams, who's going to run as an independent, he's already got his line. He pulls from Cuomo. The Republican pulls from Cuomo.
Right.
So
I
the
mean,
one,
I think those polls are slight.
yeah,
You know,
but in a very close race, a few points makes a difference.
it's true. It's true.
And
I mean,
but
the question to me is that, I mean, Republicans aren't aren't voting in the Democratic primary. So that's kind of neither
Right.
here nor there a little bit. Adams obviously has, he had enough support to win last time, but if you look at his polling numbers in his approval ratings in New York City, he's in the single digits almost,
Right.
right? So I mean,
Right.
it's not a big number that he's going to pull, but as you say, if it's a close race, maybe that puts Mdani over the top.
So a couple of other comments about Mdani. This is generational. He has vaulted over a whole generation of liberals. He's a millennial, and he's got an army of volunteers, and he's an immigrant. And the fact that he's an immigrant, and I'll tell you a little bit more if you want to know about his history.
Hmm.
30% of the New York electorate were born outside the United States.
Mm.
And
Wow, that's an incredible number.
yeah, and so his base and AOC's base are very similar. And he's very similar to her. He's charismatic. And so the other really interesting thing that's going to happen is, the fact that he's a Muslim, he is going to be Israel baited like crazy.
Well, he already has been. I mean, he
Yeah,
already has been.
but he hasn't quite had the visibility. Once it's clear that he's the anti-Cuomo, the Israel lobby is going to go nuts, as is Cuomo on this. And I
Right. You
reckon,
could see a lot of money coming into this
yep.
race, uh, either in the next couple weeks to try to knock him out, or, if there's a general election.
And
Uh,
yet there was a poll in the forward that shows that 20% of Jewish voters in New York prefer Mamdani.
yeah.
And that got me thinking that liberal Jews, of whom there are a lot in New York City, have kind of had no place to go. I mean, liberal Jews are deeply ashamed of what's being done in their name by Netanyahu. And in the conflation of anti-Semitism with criticism of Netanyahu and Gaza, it's put Jewish voters in a bind. You could see Jewish voters deciding, damn it, I'm going to vote for Montani to just to demonstrate
I
that
think
I don't
that's
hate Muslims, and this is not about religion. This is about policy.
I think that's an important point, and I have a lot of things to say about this. But
Go for it.
the first thing is that if you think about AIPAC spending in House races, usually in safe seats and Democratic seats, it is primarily in races with very low numbers of Jewish voters. I mean, I think that's a pretty
Yeah,
clear statement. And those races, by the way, when AIPAC puts money in, those advertisements have nothing to do with Israel policy. They're just hitting a candidate on some unrelated matter and spending millions of dollars to do it, and that drives down their numbers. Uh, it, there's something very different about trying to do that in New York City, where, you know, in the rest of the country, it's low information voters. In New York City, you have very engaged voters, uh, and uh, and those voters are pretty aware of, where the candidates stand on these particular issues.
right.
And so AIPAC could try to throw millions of dollars into this race, and maybe they will, and they'll probably try to hit Mdani on some other unrelated topic. I don't know what that would be, but I just think the high engagement of voters in New York City makes that a tough lift.
Yeah,
And maybe I'm being a little bit oversensitive. Maybe there are low information voters in New York City, but I feel like, and Jewish voters especially, like they know the score, right? They know where these candidates stand, and the dynamic you get into, I think, is important. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say is that Mamdani is a really interesting candidate in terms of his sort of personal likability. I first got sort of attracted to him. He was doing all these man on the street interviews where he was just talking to people in New York City, and it was really engaging. Like he was really a good host. And it got me thinking about the fact that his mother is Mira Nair. And Mira Nair is a celebrated filmmaker. She made Mississippi Masala, which was actually a really great movie from the late 80s, early 90s with Denzel Washington, and Salam Bombay, and a bunch of other movies. And, you know, the idea that this guy grew up sort of on sets and understands showmanship and how that is part of politics, I think is very acute. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. That he knows how to be entertaining. He knows how to get people interested in his issues, and we should talk about what his issues are, and you can do that. He knows how to present them in an engaging way.
Well, and also Cuomo is grumpy. Cuomo is
Right. Is
vindictive.
the antithesis of someone who grew up
Absolutely. And
in show business.
Cuomo is about as much like Trump as any Democrat, whereas Mdani is the anti-Trump. He's light, he's pleasant, he's engageable. And what what does AIPAC say? He's a socialist. And Mdani goes, you bet I am, and here's why.
Right.
His program includes a
Hmm.
freeze on rent in rent stabilized apartments.
Hmm.
That's pretty popular in New York City. It includes municipally owned supermarkets, one per borough in supermarket deserts. That's pretty popular. It includes a kind of detoxified version of defund the police, where you don't take money away from the police, you add social workers, you add mental health workers, so that, as Mondami likes to say, the cops are freed up to go after real criminals. And if you have a domestic violence situation, you bring in somebody who's going to calm it down rather than heat it up. And, this is popular stuff. It's stuff that resonates with real voters. And when AOC endorsed him, she said a really interesting thing. She said, this is not so much about ideological unity. This is about somebody who can really rally working class voters. And she's
Right.
speaking out of her own experience. And I think some of her popularity is going to rub off on him. So it's an interesting mix of temperament and style and program.
Yeah. And so that's all really important. And then the third thing I want to say, as you say, he is running on a program that really is targeted at working class voters, targeted at trying to meet some of their basic necessities and help them along in life in New York City. But my understanding of how he really started to break through and came to prominence was by taking very strong stance and fighting back against ICE raids in New York City.
Oh, yes.
And that's where he started to break from the pack. And there's a thesis that I've been kind of developing, and I want to get your take on it. That at this moment, at this time, the real fault lines in democratic politics are whether you're going to stand up and fight back against a creeping authoritarianism or whether you're going to sit there and take it. And nowhere is that more kind of pronounced than in New York, where you have a senior senator in Chuck Schumer who laid down and allowed, the budget bill to fund the government to pass with his support, and who has generally been seen as ineffective as a bulwark against Trumpism. And then you have the most popular figure at least in New York City, AOC, who has been going out on a fighting oligarchy tour and has been speaking out in these ways. And Mdani, I think, represents the stand up and fight part of that fault line in ways that Cuomo, I mean, I think he does in certain ways because Cuomo and Trump are at odds, and Cuomo's under investigation by the Trump administration, et cetera. But I think it's much easier to sort of make those parallels between Mamdani and AOC on one hand and Cuomo and Schumer on the other.
Yeah. And David, it's even better than that because, yes, very much stand up and fight, but not in the kind of caricatured, grim lefty sort of way. I
Right.
mean, he's a happy warrior.
Happy warrior, yeah.
He's light on his feet. He's relatable. And this is a city of immigrants, maybe only 30%, which is huge, of the electorate is immigrant. Probably 45% of the population is
Right.
immigrant. And
And
he's
they're
their
sitting
guy.
there seeing like their first exposure to this
That's
guy
right.
was him trying to get rid of Tom Homan's charges of ICE officers in New York
Right.
City.
And
That I think was a really great introduction. Like this guy is working for me. He's fighting for me.
right. And he's only, I mean, the other thing that's interesting about is his religion. He's a Muslim, but he's only incidentally a Muslim. That's not his prime self-identity. His prime self-identity is I'm a democratic socialist who fights for regular people. And the other thing that's interesting in this race is that he has come on so strong, so fast that the rest of the field is just going to have to say, okay, he's earned this, and we're going to unite behind him.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could talk briefly about the rest of the field. So, you mentioned Adrienne Adams, who's the Speaker of the City Council in New York City and a respected African American woman. There's another African American senator, state senator, Zellner Myrie, who's in the race. And then there are two sort of white liberals from an older era, Scott Stringer and Brad Lander. Not that they're old, but they sort of bridge that divide. They're more in the Gen X area than the millennial or Gen Z of Mdani. I'm sorry. And then there's Jessica Ramos, who today came out and endorsed Cuomo after she had written, things basically trashing Cuomo for months and months because she was in the race against him. She's a state assembly member as well, but she wasn't doing well. And so she decided to endorse Cuomo. And this was the old thinking, weeks and months ago. I mean, you have SEIU 32BJ, which is one of the bigger unions in New York City. They endorsed Cuomo because, and I think the thinking behind this, and maybe you're not, maybe you agree or not, is that this guy's vindictive, this guy's petty, he's going to win. Let's get on his good side.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. But if you look at so important detail here, they're no longer part of WFP. And after the fiasco in 2018,
Well,
where
what was that? Tell us about that fiasco.
well, basically, WFP had tried to run a couple of other candidates. It was a fiasco.
Yeah, Cynthia Nixon, I
Union,
think, ran in that
yeah,
one, right?
Cynthia Nixon, and before that, anyways, too much.
Zephyr Teach out in 2014,
Yeah,
but
right, right.
Cynthia Nixon in 2018.
And
Yeah.
and then the unions just basically used their muscle to insist that the WFP endorse Cuomo. And at that point, they had a kind of a divorce, and the big unions just quit WFP. Now the unions who are still part of WFP don't have as much power within WFP, and they're very lukewarm on Cuomo. They don't like him. Their support for him is purely instrumental. If he's going to win, okay, we'll endorse him. But if it looks like he's not going to win, we have no particular love for this guy.
So
So it's a
that is
different
why that
dynamic.
so that's why even though in 2018 they did do that, they did endorse Cuomo for governor and not run Cynthia Nixon on their own
Right,
line. You're
right.
saying the dynamic has changed within
Totally.
WFP, and so
And
there's a
also,
much greater chance that they'll run their own guy.
right. And also, Cynthia Nixon did terribly in the Democratic primary. So people who
Right.
wanted to
And she
give
was
her
running statewide where she
right.
would have an even worse chance than in New York City where it's much more democratic.
Yeah, and I think the feeling will be if Mamdani loses by 1 or 2 points, he's earned the right to go head to head with Cuomo. And other point, Cuomo is not going to wear well. He's not likable. He's like Trump, and I just think four
There
or
is a
five
sense that he thinks this should be handed to him, right? I mean,
yeah,
I think he raised the money, and where's that money coming from? We should talk about that.
Trump donors and developers.
That's right. That's right. And which Mamdani called out in the debate
Right.
this week. So, another 2.5 million I just saw was dumped in by developers just this week. He's got Bill Ackman money. He's got Ken Langone money. It's Wall Street and the real estate, the fire sector,
He
basically.
doesn't have the kind of ground game that
Right. There's an
Mdani.
expectation that he can spend all that money and that'll be it. And not without some reason. I mean, that was Bloomberg's way that he won several races in New York City in the 2000s. And so it's not like that's a crazy scenario. You just flood the zone. He's got the name ID, and that propels him to victory. But you're saying that there's some different dynamics there.
Well, Bloomberg, say what you will about Bloomberg, he was a much sunnier personality. And he actually did some things. I disagree with a lot of them, but he did some good things for the city. This is about Cuomo personally. I still need to be in it. I need a job. I've earned this. And people see through that.
Right. Now, I want to ask you this because, New York City politics are fascinating, but obviously we're a national magazine, and I want to know what you think the relevance of this race is nationally, where we're having within the Democratic Party a big kind of internal spat about the future of the direction. This week, we had this thing called Welcome Fest, which people called, centrist Coachella. I also heard it called NeoCon. So you had you have this faction that wants to be more deregulatory, more friendly to Silicon Valley and tech interests, and more adversarial towards the left, right? And the groups that are big factors in progressive policy. And in what ways do you think this New York City race has resonance for that battle?
Well, two things. I mean, the AOC Bernie tour demonstrated where the energy is on the left, but I would also compare New York with the other big cities that have a lot of immigrants, that have progressive grass movements, and it turns out that leadership really matters. So in Boston, where you have Michelle Wu, who's great, who's very effective, who's probably going to beat, another billionaire, Kraft, who
Right.
is,
Explain that race a little bit for people who don't know enough.
well, well, let me just lay out the landscape and
Okay.
I'll.
Yeah. Sure.
You got LA, which you know better than I do. You got Chicago, where you have a lefty mayor who's not a very effective mayor.
LA,
And
we're going to have a similar dynamic in
right,
not this year, but next year. Karen Bass is going to run for reelection, and Rick Caruso, who is also a
right.
billionaire mall developer, who almost, he ran. He actually didn't come very close
No.
4 years ago,
The point,
3 years ago, but he's going to run again.
but the point is, you've got a vibrant grassroots left in many of these cities. We can
Yeah.
also talk about Philly. And in Boston, you've got a very talented mayor in Michelle Wu. And Kraft is just, who's a billionaire, part of the Kraft
He's the
family.
son of Robert Kraft, who's the
Right,
owner of the New England
right.
Patriots, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Patriots. And he he's trying to buy the election. He's a carpetbagger. He doesn't even live in Boston.
Mhm.
And he doesn't fit Boston's tribal politics. Now, Wu comes from the smallest tribe. She's Asian American.
Right.
I don't think I don't think Kraft is going to make much headway with African American voters or Latino voters, and I think Wu wins. So it's a case of a talented leader who's a progressive taking advantage of the anti-Trump feeling to kind of beat a billionaire who's trying to buy the election.
It's
And
very
and
interesting.
there's an analogy
Yeah,
to
please.
New York because
Well, it's
Cuomo is
interesting
trying to
because
buy the
when Mdani was asked, everybody was asked in the debate, who is your idea of a leader in the Democratic Party right now? And Mamdani said Michelle Wu.
oh, yeah.
I
Yep.
think Lander did as well.
Yeah.
And so that's really interesting, something we'll keep an eye on. But do you think that resonates nationally when we're trying to talk about what candidates should be running in Senate races? How are we going to recapture the U.S. Senate? when the way that the Senate is set up means you have to run in red states and win in red states,
I'm just saying it's
et cetera.
it's the habitat of an energized, believable left. Okay, pause, full stop.
Yeah,
Now, Senate races, governor races, race for the nomination in 2028. If there is a democracy in 2028, that's a whole other thing.
right.
And
So
um,
not much relevance in New York to
well,
that.
relevance in one sense, it creates an activated base.
Right,
So if you have, let's say Pritzker turns out to be the believable progressive candidate, that's a ready-made base. Those are activists. It's not just the individual people in the suburbs. It's activated people who will then go out and volunteer, not just in their own neighborhoods, because New York is going to go Democratic no matter what, as is Illinois, as is Massachusetts.
right,
But it shows a source of energy around progressive values and progressive policies. And I think that's an asset. And it's ultimately more believable than the crypto guys trying to buy the ideology of the party and the soul of the party.
right, right. Well, it's a series of questions and debates that we're going to be continuing with discussing for a long time. We're just about out of time. I don't know if you wanted to bring up anything else that you worked on this week, or things you're seeing out there that merit more attention. But I'll give you the floor for the last
Uh,
word.
I think the wheels are finally starting to come off the bus between the feud with Musk and the impasse over the big, beautiful bill and the tariffs backfiring. And, then the question is what happens next? Does he have a stroke? Does does Vance become president? Because we knew that sooner or later the wheels would come off the bus, and we're starting to see this happen. So maybe next week we'll have more detail.
Indeed, and we'll be here to talk about it. The one thing I'm going to put on people's radar screen is, a couple weeks ago, Democrats collaborated on this crypto bill in the Senate, the Genius Act, which is about stablecoin regulation. There was an expectation that that would get final passage this week, and it didn't. And there are really interesting reasons why it didn't. I don't think we have enough time to go into them here, but and they don't necessarily have to do with Democrats having a change of heart either. It actually is one idiosyncratic Republican who's gumming everything up. But I'm going to be writing about that next week. And I just, the fact that there was such a strong pushback to Democrats for collaborating on something where the Trump corruption was so obvious and so pronounced, I think has had an impact. Even though this Genius Act bill isn't necessarily being stalled because of Democrats, I think the overall project to rewrite the rules on crypto is seeing some resistance because of the furious pushback.
And let me just connect that to Cuomo and Musk and Trump.
Sure.
At some point, there is a public revulsion against the degree of corruption, and that's starting to set in.
Indeed. Indeed. All right. We are out of time. Bob Kuttner, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. We are here every Friday, 12:30 Eastern, on the weekly Roundup. We also put an archive up on this at our website, prospect.org. That'll be up here later today. If you enjoy this hour of discussion, tell your friends, get them on. You just go to our YouTube page, youtube.com/The American Prospect, and sign up, and you'll get a notice for when we do this again, and we do it every week. But until next